Take a look at this chart. It shows how much lithium the EU is producing. It may look like a lot, but compared to the rest of the world, it's only 0.1%, basically next to nothing. Lithium is the white gold we need to make batteries for electric cars, and huge ones to store renewable energy, so a pretty important mineral for the green transition the EU is trying to finagle. But 0.1% means the bloc has to massively rely on imports. And you don't need to be an expert to see the big problem here, because it means any trouble overseas could spell disaster for the EU's battery needs.
I think the EU is panicking.
Europe is very, very late.
So the European Commission, which draws up new laws for the 27-member bloc, has hatched a plan. They want to build out a homegrown lithium supply chain, from mining to processing and turning it into batteries, all of which is going to happen in someone's backyard.
You cannot come to Serbia and take land from a Serbian farmer and expect people to be quiet.
So how realistic are the EU's goals, really? First, let's take a look at the current state of the EU's battery supply chain, starting with what's called upstream. That's the mining and extraction of raw lithium. Australia, Chile, and China are the world's top producers here, accounting for 90% of all raw lithium. The EU produces very little and imports instead. This raw lithium needs to be purified before you can make batteries. This is called midstream, and
this is where the biggest problem is.
Yulia Paliskanova is a senior director at the nonprofit Transport and Environment. She works on sustainable batteries and critical raw materials.
Because anywhere between 70 to 90% of that stage, depending on the mineral, is actually in China.
The EU has so little domestic refining capabilities that it currently imports almost all of its processed lithium. And then there's the downstream part, which is making the actual batteries. The EU does have some battery factories, but 75% of production capacity is owned by Korean companies. LG's plant in Poland accounts for 50% alone. Also, buying batteries from abroad is still cheaper than making them in Europe, especially since the cost of importing them is so low.
Right now, as we're struggling to scale battery manufacturing, the import tariff into Europe is just over 1%. 1%. Why would you ever bother with 1%?
The big picture is this. Europe very, very much depends on the rest of the world for its batteries. And this turns into a real problem when something unexpected happens. For example, prices for processed lithium hit record highs after COVID lockdowns messed with supply chains and caused severe delays in mining. After that, the EU signed long-term supply contracts with lithium producers in Australia, Chile, and Argentina. Then it got serious about legislation.
I am announcing a European Critical Raw Materials Act.
The law says that by 2030, so basically tomorrow, the EU has to source 10% of its critical raw materials domestically and turn 40% of its raw materials into battery-grade stuff inside the EU. And that's a long way from the status quo.
Completely unrealistic.
Dr. Johan Kalb is a geochemist working on lithium extraction, and he's here for the reality check.
When we look very much upstream, I think it is not feasible at all, because it takes so much time to make a mine and to do the investment.
Yet there is a fair bit of lithium in Europe, 3.1% of the world's reserves, according to the European Commission.
Mining is going on in Finland and Sweden, Poland, and then, of course, the Eastern European part with Romania, Bulgaria, Greece, there's some mining.
Some of the biggest untapped reserves, though, are on the Czech-German border, Austria, Spain, and Portugal. And mining corporations are trying to get at these deposits. London-based Savannah Resources has proposed building several mines in Portugal's Covos de Boroso region. In Spain, Lithium Iberia plans to launch an open-pit mine in the rural area of Cañaveral, where it's planning to operate for 30 years. And over in the Czech Republic, the Cinovec project, run by European Metals Holdings, claims to be the largest hard rock lithium project in the EU.
If all of them, all the projects that we have now come into operation, then this would be enough for the supply of Europe.
So what's holding them back? Part of the answer is currently playing out in a country more known for its biggest tennis star than its mineral deposits.
We're aware of Serbia's rich resources and the enormous potential, with confirmed reserves of 158 million tons of lithium borate.
Serbia isn't a member state of the EU yet, but what's happening here is emblematic of the continent's struggles to get their battery industry going. British-Australian mining giant Rio Tinto has been fighting for mining rights in the Jadar region of western Serbia since 2004. A scientific study says that enough lithium can be extracted here to cover 90% of the continent's needs. But residents have fiercely protested against this, fearing land grabs and a destroyed environment. They managed to revoke Rio Tinto's license in 2022, but after a government U-turn, the project was reinstated in July. Residents again took to the streets.
This country has been slowly sold off to foreign investors.
Bojana Novakovic is an anti-mining activist with the group Marsedrina.
People have just had enough. You know, Rio Tinto might be the most humanitarian mining company in the world. They could be the Mother Teresa of mining. We don't want another mine in Serbia. Like, we need to clean what's going on here first before any foreign investors are allowed to occupy land and turn them into a waste dump.
A scientific study showed that research drilling by Rio Tinto has already leaked boron, arsenic, and lithium into rivers. Activists say the mining site threatens an ecosystem that has hundreds of protected species, with generational farms that produce 70 million euros worth of food per year. Serbia is not alone. People in Portugal, Spain, and France have also protested planned mining projects in their regions.
Someone comes along and wants to dig a mine, and we roll out the red carpet for him. We don't ask if it's bad for people, for my children who are growing up in the village next door.
This not in my backyard stance, or NIMBY for short, has pushed back on efforts to extract more lithium in the EU. But unlike families, supply chains are dependent on the middle child. Without processing, you can mine as much lithium as you want, but your factories still can't use it. And right now, the EU's lithium midstream is in bad shape.
For lithium refining, there's very little capacity.
Philip Seidel is an advisor for the auto industry. He says the biggest problem is that it's still just too expensive to do it in Europe.
You have to bring energy costs down, or you have to go where you have affordable, cheap energy, which is at the same time renewable, because we want to have a sustainable battery supply chain in Europe.
So this means bringing the refineries to coastal areas for wind, the north for hydropower, and the south for solar. Recently, they did get the ball rolling on refineries. In September 2024, Dutch company AMG Critical Minerals launched production at its plant in Bitterfeld, Germany. It plans to produce enough battery-grade lithium for around 500,000 EVs per year. Other companies like Germany's Vulcan Energy, Luxembourg-based Levista, and France's very creatively named Lithium de France also have refinery projects in development. But Europe will need more than just plant capacity.
Labor is very, very expensive in Europe compared to other regions of the world. So I think automation of the processes will be a key lever.
When we look at the state of Europe's downstream industry, the weather is sunnier but with a few more storms.
This is actually where I think Europe can meet most of its needs.
The EU already produced half the battery cells it needed in 2022. The majority came from LG plants in Poland and Samsung ones in Hungary. And the continent is rapidly scaling up. Europe is planning to build almost 50 battery factories by 2030. Theoretically, these would total 1.7 terawatts of production capacity, a whopping 10-fold increase from 2023. Still, there's so much catching up to do. China's projected 2030 capacity is about 4 terawatts, which means the race might already be over. As for the storms, the same problems apply to downstream as midstream. Establishing a battery cell factory in Europe is almost 50 times more expensive than in China, according to a Transport and Environment report. And the sector has also been plagued with bad news from its poster children, like Sweden's Northvolt, where 2 workers have died and at least 26 others were seriously injured in factories. In June 2024, BMW cancelled a €2 billion contract after a delayed delivery and quality concerns. Despite raising $15 billion in funding, the company is struggling so badly it had to lay off a substantial part of its workforce and sell one of its factories. Market conditions are also partly to blame. Lithium prices came down again in 2023, which means even cheaper batteries from China. Add to that a slump in European EV demand, and you're in for a tough sell.
There are batteries available at historically low prices because of the huge overcapacities which have been built up in China over the last years. Every battery project, and this regards to midstream and to downstream, every battery project in Europe has to present a positive business case.
In fact, a report says that around half the EU's announced capacities in 2030 are now considered at risk of being delayed, scaled down, or cancelled. All this means the EU needs to throw money at its battery industry to stand a chance. An EU report says that 76 billion euros would be needed just for battery manufacturing to achieve 2030 goals. In 2024, the Commission had announced just 9 billion euros in battery supply chain investment, and private investment has also shied away. Compare this to what's happening in the US, whose 2023 Inflation Reduction Act pledged over $70 billion towards EV and battery supply chains. And it worked. Just look at Tesla, who pulled some of its investments in Germany to focus on the North American market last year.
It's so simple. It's so visible. I, without having any knowledge or expertise in business, for example, can calculate what will be my return on investment if I invest in a battery factory in the US. And if I could, I would invest in a battery factory in the US. What the US has done, we can't do because we are a federation of member states. We're not a country.
In Europe, 27 member states have to agree, then get businesses on board before anything happens. In China, the government just does it.
At the moment, the investment climate is a bit chilly. What we need now is some persistence to get through this slump, this market slowdown for the next couple of years.
It's all about having industrial policy that will be about the business case, and this policy can be around trade. So, for example, tariffs on battery cells. It can be around carbon footprint, so environmental requirements that would advantage local manufacturing in Europe. Again, we have it in the plans, but they're delayed. And of course, finally, it can be simply investment support. Either all policies are towards the objective that we talk about, or, as I said, we go home.
So what will Europe's battery supply chain look like in the future? Mining will likely remain global. The EU gets its minerals from lots of different countries, which makes it less risky. Processing is where the continent will need to really up its game. And as for production, the EU will probably have to get comfortable with some long-term relationships.
The best way, of course, would be if we had joint ventures. That would enable European players to catch up in terms of technology and capabilities with the Asian companies.
The elephant in the room is that building out this industry has environmental and social costs. So far,
all the issues around this, harsh labor conditions, environmental issues, we export to other countries. And I find this unethical. I find this an unacceptable situation.
But NIMBYism and the impact of extractive mining is something people in Europe will have to face up to, sooner or later.
Just look at Serbia and don't expect that that's not going to happen where you are.
Does your region have a lithium battery supply chain? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe.